Hey Internet, it's RJ. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning into the show today. Now today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Credit Card Competition Act, which is a new proposed bill by a few senators, headed up by one who was actually pretty successful in nerfing debit cards. And it's aimed at creating competition, not necessarily with the credit cards you use, but between the payment networks, so Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express. So we have a summary of this bill. We're going to go through it, take a look at it, then we're going to look at some counterpoints that TPG has been nice enough to put together and come out on the other end forming an opinion, as well as what's remaining to be answered. So of course, if that sounds interesting to you, then go ahead, press the subscribe button, and let's get to work. Now, again, normally we don't just go straight article for article, but I have a copy of it or a summary right here, so I'll put it on screen in a second. Now, what we're going to look at is from Senator Durbin's website, so obviously it's skewed, but it is a decent summary, and he's one of the lead senators behind this, so we'll go through his summary really quickly here together. But overall, we've been talking about this on and off again, especially on the Sunday recap shows for quite some time, where, stores, retailers, or merchants, as they're referred to as, are constantly upset because, if you bring in a Visa credit card, that card only runs on the Visa payment network. So Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express are what's known as payment networks. Those are the major four. This bill really is only focused on Visa and MasterCard because they hold the bulk of the market, so they're kind of calling it a duopoly, if you will. Again, Discover really doesn't care, and American Express has slowly been adding their payment network to other cards. I think they signed a deal with Cardless a while back, for example, but they're not nearly as big as Visa and MasterCard. So the argument here is that, the merchants are like, hey, look, we can't actually choose. There's no competition, so these networks can set whatever price they want. And a Visa card only runs through the Visa payment network, as you would expect. If there was competition and I, as a merchant, could choose which network to run it through, well, then they would have to, be competitive again. But right now, there's not really a reason for them to do that. And so they've kind of been, merchants? I think this was like 1,700 or something, led by, I think, Target and a few marquee names, have written, time and time again to the government, like, hey, you got to do something about this. We want the power of choice and things like that. And of course, the networks and everyone else pushes back. Because if you don't know how it works, I have a whole video on how payment networks work. I can link down below for you. But the long story short of it is, of course, when you swipe your card, there's a few different people involved who are taking a cut of that transaction. You have the lender, the one issuing the card. You have the payment network that we talk about. There's a payment processor in there as well. And nowadays, if they're using Apple Pay or a digital wallet, Apple or Google or Samsung could also be a part of that. So you have all these people competing for like a little bit of the money, right? Generally, it's estimated at like 2 to 3% of a transaction. So, you can do $100, 3%, $3, and those guys fight over that $3. But again, the argument is that's coming out of the merchant's pocket. There's also another argument that everything is already 3% more expensive, so that cost, just like sales tax, is directly passed on to the consumer. But hey, that's kind of where we're at. So this has been proposed multiple times. This is probably the one with the most, I guess, plan behind it, if you want to call it that. So we'll take a look. Again, I'll put it on screen. Maybe we'll get fancy and do some picture-in-picture in here. It's only, this is a summary again. It's only a page long, and I want to flip to TPG, who has some counter arguments. But so here we go, and I'll link this down below for if you want to read it as well. So short summary of the Credit Card Competition Act for 2023. So American consumers are worried about inflation and rising prices, and credit card swipe fees are part of the problem. So the Visa MasterCard duopoly, I didn't want to do that. I wanted that. Duopoly, part of over 80% of the U.S. credit card market. So it's 576 million cards. So as we talked about, each time a Visa and MasterCard is swiped, around 2 to 3% is deducted, which is, again, what we said, but I'm just circling some notes here as we go. So actually receives some of the cut. Sure, Visa and MasterCard keep for themselves as a network fee, but most of it, an exchange fee, which is fixed by Visa and MasterCard, but paid to the bank that issued the card. Overall, merchant typically ends up receiving $98 or $97 on a sale, which is, again, what we said for our example. So in 2022 alone, Visa, MasterCard, and their card issuing banks charge merchants a total of $93 billion in credit card fees. These fees are passed on to consumers, as what we said. Market competition helps keep fees in check, but Visa and MasterCard have structured their networks to avoid competitive market pressures on their fees. Visa and MasterCard set the fee rates for all. So at this point, I'm kind of interested that they don't mention at all Discover or American Express and Discover at all. Because right now, again, as we said, these guys are the biggest, but they just straight ignore them, which I think could be an issue later. So the credit card competition, that's a synopsis of the problem, what they're trying to do. So the Credit Card Competition Act of 2023 would enhance credit card competition and choice in order to reduce excessive credit card fees. So here we go. It would require the largest credit card issuing financial institution. So we're going to see how they define largest. So assets over $100 billion to enable at least 2 credit card networks to be used on their credit cards instead of just one. So I guess a Visa card would have a Visa and a MasterCard, or not, because you couldn't use just Visa. You had to have a Visa and someone else. So in other words, after a transition period during which the Federal Reserve would write implementing regulations, the giant banks that issue competitive network go on each card. So it couldn't be a MasterCard and Visa and MasterCard. It could be a Visa and American Express or something like that, it seems. The vast majority of, they're jumping down to the bottom here now, the vast majority of banks and credit unions in the country, all but the biggest 30 or so, would not be subject to the bill. The bill's requirement to add a second credit card network. Also, cards where the network is itself the card issuer, such as American Express and Discover cards, would not be required to add a second network. That is interesting. So because they're their own thing, they're like, nah, we're not going to make you do it, which I guess kind of makes sense because that's really their core business. Further, the bill would not force banks to add any particular network to their cards. Banks would select then which second network to add, so you get some choice, as they currently do for debit cards, based on the service, security, and value of networks offered. Okay, so I think that's a decent summary. I think we get where they're going for. So if we kind of summarize that, what he's trying to say here is that, again, we're going to have a Visa card, but it's not going to, it would have to have a backup network, so then the merchant could choose which network to run it from. Maybe the merchant has a fee chart or something and says, hey, I'm going to run it through RJ's network because RJ's network is actually cheaper than Visa, and of course that's going to make Visa become more competitive. American Express and Discover get a pass because they are both banks themselves. They're both card issuers. They both function as their payment network. They're also just described as the top banks in the world, which I find very interesting because I didn't think this was a banking issue, but they made it kind of a banking issue, saying $100 billion in assets, but it's a payment network issue. So even if I'm a small bank, even if I'm a credit union, I would still be subject to the same fee. So I think that's a little bit odd as well. The history lesson here, we've seen this with debit cards. Mr. Durbin is the one who essentially nerfed debit cards. He got an amendment added to the Dodd-Frank Act, which came out around 2010, something like that, that said, debit card will be capped, as whereas credit card swipe fees and interchange fees are not capped here. Overseas, they are capped, and overseas, you don't see credit card offers or rewards nearly like you do over here because they're capped. So there's less earning potential there. So their other real question is would this work? Would this really work? And for that, again, TPG has been very helpful. They've kind of gone through and kind of aggregated some information here. So we'll just kind of go through what they have here, and I'll link this down below as well. But again, so as a percentage of transaction volume that has largely remained flat in recent years, when you compare Nielsen data from 19, 20, 21, and 22, here's how how rates have changed across all transactions processed on credit cards. And you can see there, it's not that big of a deal. They have it listed right there. In other words, a merchant who processes $100,000 per year in credit card transactions paid on average $5 more in 2022 than in 2019. So we know what it's trying to accomplish. So the other thing here would be to look at, where they have this stat down here, is the share of when they did it with debit cards, right? Because they kind of nerfed debit cards. They don't earn anything. There are some 1% cash back debit cards. Well, what they're saying is that, because they nerfed debit cards, we also saw an increase in a removal of free checking accounts. It went from 60% down to 20%, and the average checking account fees increased from $4 to about $7, $7.50. Additionally, Durbin Amendment clearly lowered the cost for merchants as banks subject to the new cap on debit card transactions saw a drop in revenue of 6.5 bill annually. Of course, again, that's why we had to make it up. So, I mean, again, this will be linked down below. I don't want to go through the entire thing. I just want to pull out some of those stats there that they got in their, aggregating piece. So overall, I mean, what do we think? Would this work? I don't see why you'd limit it to just bigger banks unless you're saying they would have the resources to find a different partner, maybe. But again, this is about the payment networks, first of all, not the bank using it. Number two, I don't know that. I mean, you'd also need more payment networks to rise up and be available for the banks to partner with. Right now, I would probably just go to American Express and slap them on the back of my card, knowing that they are usually the more expensive one. I think the bigger question here is that I can't imagine this saving a customer any money at all. Like, you mean to tell me that, in September, if this was implemented in September, the newest iPhone is going to be 2%, 3% less expensive? I really doubt it, because we're not saying processing fees are going away. We're just saying the retailer has the option to choose. But that cost has already seemed to be passed on to the customer anyways. We all kind of agree on that. So what are you really saving them, or what are you really saving us? Now, the impact on rewards, again, you could get very slippery slope here, and I'm probably going to refrain from doing a thumbnail like, is this the end of credit card rewards? But the things that credit card rewards could go down for sure. We know when swipe fees are limited from our overseas friends that it's not as lucrative for banks. Number two is probably the card protections, because those card protections, purchase protection, price protection, warranty protection, those are actually network benefits provided by Visa, MasterCard. Discover really doesn't do many of them, and American Express. So if they're not making money, they're going to have to save it up in other ways. So, I think the biggest question here is how exactly does this benefit the consumer? They put it behind inflation, sure, but there's also something else the government could do. I know not everyone here loves when we talk about the government, but realistically, if you want to save the customer money and you're concerned about inflation, why don't you adjust your sales tax? I know that's not the federal level. Each state has their own, but realistically, the government wants to talk about going after these junk fees. I'm not necessarily saying tax is a junk fee, but they call it hidden fees and junk fees, but you allow all these retailers to not include tax in the displayed price of an item. They can just say plus tax. And then, sales tax is again passed on to the customer. So if you care so much about saving the customer money, why don't you at least evaluate the fees that you're currently charging? I didn't say get rid of it altogether, but you could lower it. Here in Michigan, it's 6% sales tax. Cut it to 4%. There's your 2% right there. But you don't want to take a cut out of your money, do you? So you're asking other people to take a cut out of their money. That's where a little bit of the hypocrisy comes in my opinion. So overall, do I think this will work? You can't write Durbin off because he was successful with the debit card play. Now, of course, if he wins, even if you play this out and he won, banks will find a way to make their money. That's the concerning part to me, is even if it passed, the bank will not lose. The bank will find another way to make their money, and I think that's very apparent. Banks do not lose. They invent another product, they add on another fee, what have you. We saw the checking account example that TPG found. But no, I don't think it will work, because I think this time around the banks are too powerful. I mean, again, opinion piece, but who really runs the country? It's probably large corporations that are known to be too big to fail. And you know who large corporations have as friends? Other large corporations, like, I don't know, the partners that on their other credit cards, like Delta and United and Hyatt and Marriott, who benefit greatly from these reward programs. MGM just partnered with Marriott on a new partnership, and it's, I'm sure they discussed the credit card piece of it, because they're going to have a status match piece and a points redemption piece that all come from the credit card. So, I can respect their argument from a merchant standpoint. You got to do what's best for you, and you say, hey, this money's coming out of my pocket. But again, I just don't hide behind this going to benefit the customer. I really don't see how this benefits the customer, and I think it's almost, granted, I am biased because the current landscape does work for us, because I know how points work and we know how to get outsized value and all that stuff. But I do almost wonder if it's like a devil that you do know versus the one you don't. We know this landscape, and if you go to war with them, they have so much money and so much lobbying dollars, and you're all on the take anyways. I just think you're going to lose, or worst case scenario, we will probably lose even worse than, we already lose now if you don't play the game. But you know what they say, the scariest 9 words in the English language are, I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. And with that, I will turn it over to you for a discussion. Of course, that's been the Credit Card Competition Act with a somewhat jaded point of view probably, but the links will be down below if you want to take a look at it for yourself. So sound off, let me know what you think about this. What are your thoughts? What do you think would happen? What do you think is a reasonable solution? Love to get your thoughts on all of that down below. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this one. So, of course, if you liked it, drop me a thumbs up down below. If you found it particularly interesting, consider subscribing to the channel because we're posting content just like this every single week. And, of course, on Sundays, we have the weekly recap. And then every single day over on ProfitableContent.com with the latest news stories, credit card offers, and bank offers while they last, I guess. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this one. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you very soon in the next one.